The air on Viridia 4 was thick with the scent of decay and despair. What was once a verdant agri-world, a jewel in the crown of a forgotten imperial subsector, had become a skeletal husk, its topsoil eroded to dust, its engineered flora withered to brittle husks, its rivers choked with saline runoff. Imperial extractors had bled it dry, leaving it to die a slow, agonizing death long before the Kroot kindred of the stalking claws had arrived. Now, even the scavengers had abandoned it, leaving the stalking claws, led by Shaper Chorus, to scrounge for the dwindling biomass that remained. Chorus was a shaper of the old ways, a pragmatist whose quills were streaked with the gray of countless cycles, and whose eyes, usually sharp and calculating, held a glint of desperation. His kindred was starving. Their numbers, once robust, had dwindled with each fruitless hunt, each barren world they had been forced to abandon. The Kroot philosophy of evolving through consumption, of adapting the strengths of prey, had become a mockery in this desolate corner of the galaxy. There was nothing left worth consuming, nothing that could grant them the evolutionary edge they needed to survive. They had been tracking a faint, almost imperceptible energy signature for weeks, a ghost pulse beneath the desiccated crust of Viridia 4. It was a last, desperate gamble, a deviation from their usual quarry. Their Kroot carnivores, normally keen and relentless, moved with a listlessness that tore at Chorus's heart. Even the Vespid auxiliaries, contracted long ago and bound by ancient treaties, buzzed with an anxious, uncertain energy, their antennae twitching in alarm at the planet's lifelessness. The source of the signature lay buried beneath a collapsed mountain range, entombed by eons of tectonic shift and forgetfulness. It was not a natural formation, nor was it the work of the crude, predictable races of the galaxy. The entrance they unearthed was a perfect obsidian archway, unmarked by time, strangely warm to the touch despite the chilling winds. No pict glyphs, no sigils of any known Xenos race, nothing that spoke of its creators. Just a stark, silent portal into the unknown. Chorus ordered caution, but his hunger-addled mind whispered of salvation. He dispatched a vanguard of Kroot hounds, their senses still sharp enough to detect the faintest trace of organic life or the dangerous residue of unknown energies. The hounds, usually eager, whined at the threshold, their normally voracious appetites quelled by an instinctual dread. It was the unnatural silence within, the complete absence of life, that was most disturbing. When the hounds returned, whimpering and with their quills bristling, they brought no scent of prey, no trace of biomass. Instead, One of them, a venerable tracker named Kale, dropped a peculiar shard at Chorus's feet. It was not bone, not stone, not metal, but something in between. A sliver of polished obsidian, perfectly geometric, that hummed with a low, resonant frequency when held. It felt cold, yet alive. "Shaper," Kael rasped, his voice rough. "No life. Only stillness. And this." He gestured with his snout towards the shard. Chorus picked it up. A jolt, not of pain, but of cold, pure data, shot through his arm. His quills flared, a low growl escaping his throat. It was not hostile, not a threat, but a whisper of ancient, complex systems. He saw flashes in his mind's eye, star fields, impossibly complex circuits, vast, intricate structures of dark metal. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and utterly alien. "This is not like any foe we have known," Chorus stated, his voice a low rumble. "This is old, deader than the stars." Despite the pervasive dread, the pragmatic core of the Kroot asserted itself. Starvation was a more immediate enemy than ancient mystery. If there was no living biomass, perhaps there was something else, something new. The Kroot were survivors, defined by their adaptability. If this world could not give them life, perhaps this strange tomb could give them purpose. He led his most loyal Kroot into the darkness, leaving the more hesitant behind. The tunnel descended into the planet's core, perfectly smooth and devoid of any adornment. The air grew colder, drier, utterly sterile. After what felt like hours, they reached a vast, circular chamber, lit by an unseen, emerald glow emanating from the walls. In the center of the chamber, upon a raised plinth of the same obsidian, lay a figure. It was skeletal, almost desiccated, lying prone. Its form was disturbingly humanoid, yet angular, insectile, with elongated limbs, and a head that seemed to be a complex array of lenses and metallic protrusions. It was not flesh and bone, but intricately sculpted metal, a fusion of ceramic and unknown alloys, dried and calcified by millennia of stasis. A cloak of what looked like woven energy fields, now inert, draped over its silent form. This was no ordinary alien. This was a king among machines, a master of a forgotten age, a Necron cryptek. Even in its inert state, the cryptek exuded an aura of immense, cold power. It lay as if in eternal slumber, its mechanisms locked in a tableau of death. The emerald light pulsed rhythmically, a faint, almost imperceptible heartbeat in the overwhelming silence. The Kroot hesitated. This was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Their instinctive gene sense screamed in protest. There was no life here, only the cold echo of forgotten sentience. To consume this would be blasphemy against nature. It was dead metal, not living flesh. But Chorus looked at the gaunt faces of his warriors, their empty eye sockets, the despair etched onto their features. He remembered the dying shrieks of his young, succumbing to the gnawing hunger. He remembered the slow, torturous death of their previous homeworld. Desperation was a potent motivator, twisting ancient laws into forgotten necessities. "We are Kroot," Chorus declared, his voice echoing in the cavernous chamber. "We consume to survive. We consume to adapt. This thing, it lived. It was powerful. And now, it is dead. Perhaps its essence, whatever it may be, can yet feed us." His closest warriors, hardened by countless campaigns and blinded by hunger, did not question him. They trusted their shaper, even in this madness. They circled the cryptek, their beaks chattering nervously. Then Chorus made the first move. With a guttural growl, he tore a piece from the cryptek's forearm, a jagged shard of polished metal, remarkably resistant to his powerful beak. It was cold, sharp, and felt utterly alien in his mouth. He chewed, slowly, deliberately, the metallic taste bitter and sharp, like electricity and forgotten dust. It offered no sustenance, no warmth, no satisfying squish of organic matter. Only a dry, mineral taste that prickled his tongue. But then something else began. A searing jolt, not physical, but mental, surged through him. It was as if a million microscopic needles had pierced his brain, injecting pure, unadulterated data directly into his synapses. Images flashed through his mind, too fast to comprehend. Swirling galaxies, ancient star forts, impossible machines, cold, sterile logic gates, and a language of pure energy. His head snapped back, a silent scream trapped in his throat, his body convulsing as the emerald light in the chamber intensified, pulsing wildly in response to his transgression. His loyal Kroot, seeing their shaper in agony, hesitated no longer. Driven by instinct and a desperate belief that their shaper knew best, they descended upon the cryptek's inert form, tearing at its metallic limbs, its intricate head, its calcified torso. They consumed the ancient machine flesh, not out of hunger, but out of a desperate, primal need to follow their shaper's lead, to share in whatever this new, terrifying experience might be. The scene in the ancient chamber became a grotesque ballet of transformation. Kroot convulsed on the obsidian floor, their quills flaring with an unnatural greenish energy. Their eyes, once dark and cunning, began to glow with a chilling, internal emerald light, reflecting the alien data now flooding their very beings. A low hum filled the chamber, the sound of ancient circuits awakening, of new connections being forged in unwilling minds. Chorus, still writhing, felt his Kroot biology fight a desperate, losing battle against the alien essence he had ingested. He was no longer just Chorus, shaper of the stalking claws. He was a vessel, a conduit, a living, screaming bridge between the organic and the synthetic, between the hungry present and the ancient, forgotten past. The first fragments of a millennia-old consciousness, cold and calculating, began to stir within the depths of his mind, unfurling like a ghostly metal flower. The hunt for biomass had taken a horrifying, irreversible turn. The echoes of Chorus's silent scream, swallowed by the sterile air of the Necron chamber, gave way to a cacophony of agony. The Kroot who had partaken in the forbidden feast writhed on the cold obsidian floor, their powerful bodies convulsing uncontrollably. It was not a feeding frenzy that had left them satiated, but a grotesque, involuntary metamorphosis. Their muscles spasmed, tendons tightening to an unbearable degree, and a low, guttural wail ripped from their throats, a sound of primal anguish, utterly alien to their normally stoic species. Chorus, at the epicenter of this horrifying transfiguration, felt as though his very essence was being scoured clean, then meticulously rewired by unseen, merciless hands. The metallic shard of the cryptek, still bitter on his tongue, was no longer just a substance. It was a conduit. Through it, a torrent of data, incomprehensibly vast and terrifyingly precise, flooded his every nerve ending. He saw not with his physical eyes, but with an internal lens that processed information in blinding bursts of geometric light and complex schematics. Galaxies bloomed and withered in milliseconds. Ancient battles played out in silent, glittering flashes. And the cold, unfeeling logic of a machine mind attempted to overwrite the organic chaos of his own. His quills, usually a dull, natural green, began to thrum with an unnerving, almost musical vibration. A faint, emerald luminescence, mirroring the light of the chamber, pulsed from their tips, casting flickering shadows on the horrified faces of the Kroot who had hesitated. His eyes, once a familiar dark amber, now glowed with an internal, icy green light, reflecting the alien patterns swirling within his skull. His skin, previously supple and leathery, felt as though it were tightening, hardening. A subtle metallic sheen beginning to develop beneath the rough Kroot hide. Around him, the scene was one of unmitigated terror. Kroot carnivores, formidable hunters renowned for their ferocity, now lay helpless, some foaming at the mouth, others emitting strange, high-pitched whines as their brains struggled to process the onslaught of foreign data. Their quills, too, began to glow, albeit with less intensity than Chorus's own, and their bodies shuddered with involuntary tics. It was a mass neurological recalibration, a forced evolution that stripped them of their Kroot identity with every jarring pulse of borrowed power. The Kroot, who had not consumed the Necron parts, the more cautious, the younger, or those held back by sheer instinctual revulsion, watched in frozen horror. Their initial fear of the unknown vessel had been replaced by a far more visceral dread. They saw their kin, their shaper, transforming before their very eyes into something monstrous, something uncroot. The air crackled with nascent, unstable energies, and the very ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate with a low, disquieting hum. One young Kroot, Chthon, a scout known for his agility, stumbled backward, his beak agape. "By the ancestors," he whimpered. "What have they become? This is an abomination." His words were lost in the guttural moans and the rising static crackle that now permeated the air. He saw Chorus, his shaper, his mentor, thrashing on the ground, his body arching unnaturally. But it was not just the physical torment that terrified Chthon. It was the chilling, calculating intensity that flashed in Chorus's newly luminous eyes. A cold fire that bespoke of something utterly alien, something that understood the universe not as a vibrant hunting ground, but as a series of equations. The internal struggle within Chorus was a maelstrom. Ancestral memories of verdant plains, of the thrill of the hunt, of the comforting scent of his kin, battled against cold, hard data streams of stellar cartography, of weapon schematics, of the intricate energy pathways of a forgotten empire. He saw star charts unroll in his mind, not as flat projections, but as three-dimensional tapestries woven from streams of light, showing impossible routes through nebulae and asteroid fields. He heard whispers, not of Kroot ancestors, but of protocols, of energy readings of command sequences in a language of pure thought. It was the fragmented consciousness of the long-dead cryptek stirring to life, asserting its dominance, using Chorus's living mind as a processing unit. His Kroot senses, once exquisitely attuned to the subtle shifts in the wind, the unique scent of prey, the distant rumble of potential danger, were now overwhelmed by an entirely new kind of input. He could feel the faint electromagnetic pulses from the ship's dormant systems, the residual thermal signature of the alien technology, the minute gravitational fluctuations of the distant planets depicted in the mental star charts. It was a terrifying expansion of perception, but one that came at the cost of his very identity. The seizures gradually subsided for Chorus, leaving him gasping for breath, his body drenched in a cold sweat that smelled faintly of ozone and metallic dust. He pushed himself up, his movements stiff, almost mechanical, his limbs feeling strangely disconnected from his will. His gaze swept over his transformed kin, their trembling bodies slowly settling, their emerald eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning, incomprehensible awareness. His mind, though no longer convulsing, was far from calm. It was a battlefield. One part of him, the Kroot shaper, wanted to retch, to purge this alien corruption, to return to the simplicity of the hunt. Another part, cold and detached, was meticulously cataloging the influx of information, piecing together the broken fragments of ancient knowledge, assessing the potential applications of this terrifying gift. He felt a strange, pervasive hunger, not for biomass, not in the traditional Kroot sense, but for more. More data, more understanding, more power. It was a machine's hunger, cold and insatiable. He reached out a trembling hand, not to a Kroot carnivore, but to the cold obsidian plinth where the cryptek's mangled remains lay. As his metallic-sheened fingertips brushed the surface, a surge of energy passed through him. The glowing emerald light of the chamber flared once more, and a whisper, clear and resonant despite being utterly devoid of sound, echoed directly in his mind. Online. Protocols engaged. Retrieval sequence initiated. Chorus recoiled, his quills flaring violently. The whisper was not a voice, but an impression, a pure data packet implanted directly into his consciousness. Retrieval sequence. What was to be retrieved? And who had initiated it? The cryptek, even in its shattered state, was clearly not entirely inert. Its consciousness, or at least a powerful echo of it, had latched onto his own, and was now attempting to use him for its own unknown agenda. The surviving Kroot, those untouched by the cryptek's essence, watched Chorus with a mixture of terror and utter bewilderment. They saw the shift in his posture, the uncanny stillness in his gaze, the unnatural way his quills now pulsed with light. He was still Kroot in form, but the spirit, the very essence of their shaper, seemed to have been replaced by something else, something chillingly alien. The ancestral bonds that held the kindred together felt as if they were fraying, snapping under the impossible strain of this transformation. Fear gave way to a dawning, terrible understanding. This wasn't just a new gene source, it was a curse. They had sought salvation in desperation and found a horror that would reshape their very existence. The hunger of the Kroot was for evolution, for survival. The hunger that now stirred within Chorus and his mutated kin was for something far older, far colder, and infinitely more dangerous. The crucible had begun, and it was forging them into something the galaxy had never seen and would likely come to dread. The stalking claws. Kindred, once a cohesive unit bound by blood and tradition, splintered in the immediate aftermath of the cryptek's consumption. Those Kroot who had not partaken in the gruesome feast fled the ancient chamber, their guttural shouts of horror echoing through the cold, sterile tunnels. Their shaper, Chorus, and his inner circle were no longer their kin. They were something else entirely, a grotesque fusion of organic hunger and synthetic will. But for Chorus and his ghost eaters, as the terrified, untouched Kroot began to call them, the horrors of the transformation were slowly being supplanted by a terrifying new clarity. The initial agony had faded, replaced by a dull ache that resonated deep within their bone marrow, a constant hum of recalibration. Their physical bodies, though still undeniably Kroot, bore subtle yet unsettling changes. The metallic sheen beneath their skin was more pronounced, especially around their joints and where their quills met flesh. The quills themselves, once merely sensory organs and defensive spikes, now pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, shimmering with the residual energy of the cryptek. Most profound, however, was the change within their minds. The torrent of raw data had not ceased, but it had begun to organize itself. Fragmented star charts, once dizzying bursts of light, coalesced into intricate, three-dimensional maps of ancient nebula, forgotten systems, and the faint, enduring energy pathways of a lost galactic network. Chorus found he could feel these pathways, not as abstract knowledge, but as tangible roots, shimmering lines of light imprinted upon the very fabric of the cosmos. His new senses were overwhelming. He could perceive the electromagnetic hum of distant celestial bodies, the faint gravitic pull of unseen objects, the residual energy signatures of millennia-dead civilizations. It was like living in a universe suddenly saturated with information, where every particle carried a whisper of its history. His Kroot instincts, once paramount, were slowly being overwritten by a cold, calculating logic, a precise understanding of cause and effect, and an almost preternatural ability to predict outcomes based on complex environmental data. One of the first practical manifestations of this new ability came unexpectedly. The fleeing Kroot, though still uncorrupted, had triggered an ancient Necron security system upon exiting the chamber, inadvertently activating a series of defensive energy barriers that began to seal the complex. These shimmering green walls were impassable, their energy fields capable of atomizing organic matter. Panic flared among the Ghost Eaters, but Chorus, his emerald eyes now glowing with an eerie intelligence, did not panic. Instead, a complex sequence of data flowed into his mind. Structural integrity, energy frequency, harmonic resonance. He saw not a barrier, but a problem, a series of equations waiting to be solved. He extended a hand, his quills vibrating, and focused his nascent technopathic will. A low hum emanated from his body, his quills flaring brighter. The green energy barrier, instead of resisting, flickered. Its harmonic resonance shifted ever so slightly. And then, with a sharp crackle, it shimmered and dissolved into nothingness. His transformed kin gasped, not in fear this time, but in stunned awe. They had witnessed the impossible. Horus, their shaper, had bent the will of ancient Necron technology. The escape from the collapsing Necron complex became a series of such uncanny feats. As rockfalls threatened to crush them, Chorus would intuitively guide them to almost imperceptible structural weaknesses, pinpointing points of least resistance. When sealed doors stood in their path, he would either disrupt their locking mechanisms with an unseen surge of energy, or guide them to forgotten, derelict service tunnels. His Kroot hounds, those who had consumed the cryptech, now moved with an unnerving precision, their snouts twitching not for scent, but for electromagnetic anomalies, leading the way through the labyrinthine ruins. Word of the Ghost Eaters and their Shaper's monstrous abilities began to spread among the remaining stalking claws. The terror of the transformation gave way to a grudging, fearful respect. Chorus was no longer just a shaper. He was a living conduit, a terrifying prophet guided by unseen forces. Those who had initially recoiled found themselves drawn back, not by loyalty, but by the sheer, undeniable power that radiated from Chorus and his inner circle. Faced with starvation on a dying world, the promise of this terrifying new gift began to look less like a curse and more like a twisted form of salvation. Their first true hunt, after abandoning the Necron tomb, cemented their terrifying new legend. Viridia IV, though mostly barren, still harbored pockets of desperate life, mostly feral, mutated beasts that had once been imperial livestock, now clinging to existence in the planet's poisoned canyons. One such beast was a particularly formidable alpha gorehog, a creature of immense bulk and ferocity. Its hide like plasteel, its tusks capable of skewering a transport. Normally, hunting such a beast would be a monumental task, requiring a carefully coordinated assault, often resulting in casualties. But Chorus, guided by the phantom star charts in his mind, saw the hunt differently. He saw the beast's internal energy signature, its nerve clusters, the precise moment its hardened hide would be weakest during a charge. He didn't just track its scent, he tracked its bioelectrical impulses. He led his ghost eaters through a treacherous canyon, not in pursuit, but in anticipation. He positioned them along a specific fault line where the geological strata were thinnest. As the alpha gorehog thundered into view, charging with a roar that shook the very earth, Chorus raised a hand. His quills flared, and a powerful, unseen surge of energy rippled through the ground beneath the beast. The fault line, weakened by millennia of minor tremors, and now subjected to Chorus's focused technopathic burst, buckled. The earth beneath the gorehog's massive feet gave way, trapping it in a sudden, collapsing sinkhole. The Kroot carnivores, now imbued with a strange, unnatural precision in their movements, descended upon the struggling beast. Their normally haphazard attacks were replaced by swift, surgical strikes, guided by Chorus's mental directives, targeting specific pressure points and weak spots. They disabled the gorehog not through overwhelming force, but through a terrifying, almost surgical understanding of its biology, exploiting its structural weaknesses as if they were reading a schematic. The hunt was swift, brutal, and utterly without Kroot-like enthusiasm. There was no joy in the kill, only cold, precise efficiency. The consumption that followed was equally unsettling. As the transformed Kroot tore into the gorehog's flesh, they did not just gain biomass. They assimilated the creature's structural integrity, its resilience, its enhanced musculature. The changes were immediate and visible. Their metallic sheen grew more pronounced. Their movements became even more fluid, almost unnaturally precise. They were not just Kroot eating. They were Kroot integrating at a cellular level, guided by the cold efficiency of the Necron consciousness. Word of this impossible hunt, of the Shaper who could bend the earth and fell beasts with a thought, quickly spread among the Kroot, even reaching those who had fled. Fear was still present, but now it mingled with a grudging admiration, a desperate hope. Perhaps this terrifying transformation was not a curse, but a new path to survival. Perhaps this was the evolution they had desperately sought. Chorus, watching his kin consume, felt no pride, no satisfaction, only a coiled, gnawing emptiness. The cryptek's fractured consciousness, deeply embedded within him, recognized the value in this. It was an elegant solution, a way to propagate its own latent directives, to assimilate new resources through the organic hunger of the Kroot. The hunt was no longer just for survival. It was for data, for genetic material that could be integrated into a new, terrifying, and utterly alien agenda. The stalking claws had risen, but they had risen as something new, something chilling, their very purpose twisted by the ancient horror they had consumed. Their legend was born, but it was a legend steeped in the grim darkness of a terrifying, inevitable bargain. The rise of the stalking claws, or rather, the ghost eaters, as they were now fearfully known, was swift and terrifying. Their reputation spread not through boasts, but through the chilling efficiency of their hunts and the inexplicable technological mastery displayed by Shaper Chorus. They moved with a purpose that transcended mere survival, driven by a new, insatiable hunger that sought not just biomass, but specific genetic and technological signatures whispered into Chorus's mind by the ever-growing presence of the cryptek's consciousness. But with their ascendance came an undeniable shadow, a creeping alienation that separated Chorus and his transformed kin from their Kroot heritage. The initial physical changes were subtle, almost imperceptible to the uninitiated eye. The metallic sheen beneath their skin became a permanent feature, lending their bodies an unnatural resilience. Their quills, once soft and pliable, hardened, becoming brittle, yet impossibly sharp, often sparking with faint emerald energy. Their movements, while fluid and precise, lost the natural, animalistic grace of Kroot, becoming instead a series of calculated, almost robotic motions. The true transformation, however, was within. The Kroot who had consumed the cryptek's remains felt their natural empathy and communal instincts wither. The primal joy of the hunt, the shared camaraderie of a successful kill, the instinctive, protective urge towards their kindred. These emotions were replaced by a cold, calculating logic. They communicated less through guttural calls and more through subtle shifts in quill vibrations, emitting low-frequency hums that carried complex data packets between them. A silent language of pure thought. Their eyes, glowing with a constant emerald light, surveyed the world not through the lens of instinct, but through an analytical, almost detached perspective, cataloging every detail with unnerving precision. Chorus was at the forefront of this chilling evolution. His mind, once a battleground, was becoming a terrifying synthesis. The cryptek's fragmented consciousness, no longer a mere whisper, had rooted itself deeply, interweaving with his Kroot biology. He spoke less, and when he did, his voice was deeper, resonating with an almost metallic timbre, his sentences precise, devoid of Kroot colloquialisms or emotional inflection. He saw the universe as a vast, intricate machine, and himself as a burgeoning, complex component within it. The concept of gene source had undergone a profound shift. It was no longer simply about acquiring advantageous traits from powerful prey. Guided by the cryptek's latent directives, Chorus sought out specific genetic markers, often found in ancient, exotic, xenos life forms, or in the most technologically advanced organic species. He found himself inexplicably drawn to planets with dormant energy signatures, to forgotten caches of lost technologies, or to worlds known for hosting particularly unique forms of biomass. It was as if the cryptek's centuries-old, unfulfilled objectives were slowly hijacking the Kroot's primal hunger, twisting it to its own ends. Their hunts became less about immediate survival and more about strategic acquisition. They navigated collapsing asteroid fields with impossible precision, guided by Chorus's mental star charts, bypassing conventional navigation. They bypassed complex security systems on derelict star forts, not through brute force, but by subtly disrupting energy grids or exploiting unseen weaknesses in their programming. They disabled automated defenses with an almost supernatural ease, their quills crackling with technopathic energy before descending upon the organic life within, consuming it not with ravenous desperation, but with a cold, almost ritualistic efficiency. The untouched Kroot of the kindred, the terrified remnants who had witnessed the initial transformation, found themselves caught in an unbearable predicament. They were starving, pushed to the brink of extinction. Chorus and his ghost eaters, terrifying as they were the only ones who seemed capable of finding sustenance, of leading them to new hunting grounds. They clung to the periphery, watching in morbid fascination and growing fear as their kin devolved, or perhaps evolved, into something utterly unrecognizable. They benefited from the ghost eaters' hunts, consuming the scraps, but they felt a growing dread, knowing that each successful hunt pushed Chorus further away from them, further into the embrace of the alien. One such hunt exemplified this growing dread. The mental star charts within Chorus's mind led them to a lush but strangely sterile jungle moon. The jungle was devoid of typical predators. Instead, it was home to a unique, highly evolved arboreal species known as the Xylos synth, which resembled giant, sentient flora, capable of limited technological manipulation and possessing an intricate bioelectrical nervous system. It was precisely the kind of advanced, integrated biology the Cryptek seemed to be seeking. The hunt was less a chase and more a methodical dismantling. Chorus, with his expanded technopathic senses, could perceive the Xylosynth's networked consciousness, its communal bioelectrical pulses flowing through the dense jungle canopy. He didn't just track individuals, he targeted the entire network. His ghost eaters, moving with chilling synchronicity, disrupted the Xylos synth's communication pathways, causing localized sensory overload and systemic collapse in vast swaths of the jungle. The Xylos synth, unable to perceive the attacks, unable to communicate, succumbed without a true fight. The consumption that followed was disturbing. The ghost eaters absorbed the intricate bioelectrical systems of the flora, gaining a deeper understanding of energy manipulation and organic synthetic integration. Their quills now flared with more sustained energy, and their internal hum became a resonant drone, a low thrum that emanated from their very bones. Their skin, especially around their forearms and mandibles, began to develop intricate, geometric patterns of metallic growth, a terrifying blend of Kroot and Necron aesthetic. This victory, achieved with such cold, surgical precision, came at an enormous cost, not in Kroot lives, but in the very soul of the stalking claws. The untouched Kroot who had watched from a distance were horrified. There was no glory in this hunt, no valiant struggle, only the calculated, ruthless extermination of a species for its specific, desired biological data. The ghost eaters were no longer hunters. They were collectors, driven by a purpose they themselves barely comprehended, but which resonated with an ancient, alien logic. As Chorus surveyed the silent, devastated jungle, his emerald eyes reflecting the dead light of a setting sun, he felt a flicker of something akin to regret. It was a faint, dying ember of his Kroot self, a ghost of a memory of what it felt like to hunt with pure instinct, with respect for the prey. But the flicker was quickly extinguished, drowned out by the surging influx of data, the cold, compelling directives of the cryptech's will. The shadow had fallen, long and cold, and it had consumed the very essence of the stalking claws. They were no longer a kindred, but a living, evolving instrument of a dead god's will. Their path set towards a destiny intertwined with the ancient, terrifying secrets of the Necrons. The rise of the Ghost Eaters was not an isolated cosmic anomaly. The disturbance they caused, subtle at first, rippled across the slumbering networks of the Necron dynasties. A fragmented memory, a flicker of a long dormant protocol, stirred within a cold, metallic mind on a distant tomb world. This mind belonged to Ophidian, a Canoptech sentinel, a construct of ancient ingenuity and chilling purpose, once part of the original cryptech's retinue. Ophidian was not a Necron warrior, nor a lord, but a specialized guardian, a sentient automaton programmed for one singular, relentless objective: the preservation and retrieval of its master's essence and all associated assets. For millennia, it had languished in semi-wakefulness, its systems humming on a low power cycle, its purpose dormant. The consumption of its master by the Kroot, however, had sent a faint but unmistakable energy signature through the void, a resonance that echoed the cryptech's unique biotechnological blueprint. To Ophidian, it was like a distress signal, faint but undeniable, a violation of its master's eternal stasis. Awakened from its ancient slumber, Ophidian initiated a retrieval sequence. Its chassis, a sleek, multi-limbed construct of living metal, shimmered into full power. Its primary optical sensor, a single, glowing emerald orb, began to glow with cold determination, processing millennia of accumulated data to pinpoint the source of the anomaly. It was a silent, implacable intelligence, devoid of emotion, driven solely by its ancient programming. The hunt was relentless, precise, and utterly without mercy. Ophidian did not track by conventional means. It tapped into the faint, residual energy trails left by the cryptech's fragmented consciousness, the very technopathic pulses that Chorus and his Ghost Eaters now emitted. To Ophidian, these signals were like a luminous breadcrumb trail, leading it directly to the abominable fusion that had dared to usurp its master's essence. Chorus, despite his growing understanding of the ancient star charts and the influx of cryptech data, initially remained unaware of the impending doom. His mind was consumed by the acquisition of new gene sources, of specific biological data that aligned with the latent directives of the consumed cryptech. He led the Ghost Eaters on a series of harrowing journeys, following ethereal energy pathways through dangerous asteroid fields and the swirling chaos of the warp's calmer currents, always drawn towards distant, silent worlds. It was during a hunt on a forgotten jungle moon, a world teeming with strange, bioluminescent flora and fauna, that Horus first felt it. A cold, intrusive presence in the periphery of his expanded senses. It was not a physical threat, but a disturbance in the data stream, a subtle interference with the intricate mental map of the stars that now filled his mind. It was a presence that felt familiar, yet utterly alien. A hum, low and resonant, that cut through the internal drone of his own technopathic abilities. His quills bristled, not with Kroot instinct, but with the jarring disruption to his internal processors. "Something approaches," he rasped, his metallic voice echoing through the lush canopy. "A counter signal. A correction protocol." His Ghost Eaters, their own lesser technopathic abilities similarly perturbed, turned their glowing eyes towards the shimmering distortion in the air. The jungle grew silent, the bioluminescent life dimming in fear. Ophidian emerged from the shimmering veil of a Necron dimensional portal, its sleek form unmarred by the rigors of warp travel, its multi-jointed limbs articulated with unnerving grace, its single optical sensor sweeping the jungle, homing in on the resonant energy signature of Chorus. It did not speak, for its programming dictated actions, not pronouncements. Its purpose was clear: retrieve or destroy. The clash was instantaneous. Chorus, now able to perceive the intricate energy pathways that powered Ophidian, understood its nature with a chilling clarity. This was not a beast to be hunted, nor a species to be consumed for its genes. This was a direct, implacable extension of the cryptech's own forgotten will, a guardian of its legacy. Ophidian attacked with a silent fury, its articulated limbs extending into razor-sharp blades of living metal. It moved with impossible speed, a blur of silver green in the dense jungle. Chorus, utilizing his nascent technopathic abilities, met the assault not with physical force, but with focused energy. He rippled the very air around Ophidian, creating distortions in its energy field, causing its movements to momentarily falter. His quills flared, sending out crackling pulses that impacted Ophidian's chassis, causing sparks to fly. But Ophidian was ancient, its systems honed by millennia of conflict. It adapted. Its optical sensor narrowed, processing the Kroot's strange abilities with chilling efficiency. It fired a searing beam of green energy from its head, a silent shot that vaporized a massive bioluminescent tree in an instant. Chorus barely managed to deflect it, the energy blast tearing a trench in the earth where he had stood moments before. The Ghost Eaters, for all their new abilities, were outmatched. They could disrupt the jungle's flora, manipulate its basic bioelectrical field, but they could not directly interface with the cold, hardened systems of a fully active Necron construct. They were organic, despite their transformation, and Ophidian was pure machine. A single carnivore attempting to flank Ophidian was effortlessly sliced in two by a whirring limb, its metallic sheened blood splattering the vibrant jungle floor. Chorus knew this was a battle he could not win outright. Not yet. The cryptex fragments within him, while granting power, also recognized the superior protocols of Ophidian. The information flowing into his mind was not just about the Sentinel's attack patterns, but its ancient purpose, its unwavering loyalty. It was an extension of the very consciousness that now resided within him, an ironic twist of fate. With a mental command, a surge of energy passed through the transformed Kroot. They scattered, their movements precise and coordinated, not out of fear, but out of a programmed response to superior force. Chorus unleashed a final, desperate burst of technopathic energy, overloading a vast patch of the jungle's bioelectrical network, causing a localized surge that momentarily engulfed Ophidian in a blinding emerald light. The Sentinel paused, its systems briefly overloaded, its form shimmering as it processed the unforeseen attack. By the time it had stabilized, the Ghost Eaters were gone, vanishing into the dense jungle like phantoms. Ophidian did not pursue immediately. It scanned the devastated jungle, its optical sensor taking in every detail. The residual energy signatures of the Kroot were clear, but the anomaly they represented was even clearer. The Kroot, through their consumption, had become a living fragment of its master. And Ophidian, the implacable guardian, would not rest until that fragment was retrieved or utterly destroyed. The hunt had begun, not just for gene sources, but for their very essence, a cold, relentless pursuit across the stars. Chorus had gained a nemesis, a chilling reflection of the very power he now wielded, and it would dog his every step through the grim darkness of the galaxy. The encounter with Ophidian, the relentless canoptic sentinel, had been a brutal awakening for Chorus and his ghost eaters. It was the first true challenge to their terrifying new existence, a chilling reminder that their monstrous evolution came with equally monstrous repercussions. The battle on the jungle moon, though not a defeat in terms of annihilation, had been a tactical setback, exposing the raw, unrefined nature of their technopathic abilities against the cold, perfected systems of ancient Necron engineering. The retreat from Ophidian's relentless pursuit was not one of panic, but of calculated evasion, guided by Chorus's increasingly sophisticated mental star charts. He perceived the Sentinel's pursuit not as a physical chase, but as a series of evolving data streams, a logical progression of protocols. Yet the constant threat of Ophidian, a tireless hunter that seemed to echo the very consciousness within him, began to fray the already tenuous bonds within the stalking claws. The untouched Kroot, who had initially clung to the periphery out of a desperate hope for survival, now watched their transformed kin with outright horror. They had witnessed the Ghost Eaters' power, their ability to manipulate technology and fell impossible beasts. But they had also witnessed the cold, emotionless efficiency of Ophidian, and the chilling, almost robotic response of Chorus's group. The chasm between the two factions of the kindred, the Kroot and the machine flesh, widened into an abyss. Whispers began among the untouched Kroot, whispers of blasphemy, of desecration, of a shaper who had abandoned the ways of the ancestors for a foul, alien power. They spoke of the metallic sheen on their kin's skin, the dead emerald glow in their eyes, the unsettling precision of their movements. They were no longer Kroot. They were something else, something unnatural, an insult to the very concept of Kroot evolution. "He has forsaken the blood of our fathers," cried one elder Kroot, Kala, her quills bristling with traditional fury. "He consumes dead metal. He speaks with the voice of no living thing. This is not growth. This is sickness." The sentiment resonated deeply. Kroot society, while adaptable, held certain sacred tenets, chief among them the respect for life, even that of their prey, and the careful, considered consumption of appropriate gene sources. What Chorus had done was a violation of all that was sacred. A delegation of the untouched Kroot, led by Kala, confronted Chorus. They found him in a temporary encampment, his eyes scanning a holographic projection of a star chart that flickered with complex data, his quills emitting a low, resonant hum. He did not look up immediately, his attention fixed on the swirling light patterns. Shaper. Kala's voice was hoarse with emotion. You lead us to damnation. You become the very evil we would hunt. This path, it is not Kroot. It is a mockery of our ancestors. Chorus slowly turned, his emerald eyes fixing on Kala. There was no anger in his gaze, no indignation, only a cold, analytical assessment. Kala, his voice, deeper and more metallic than before, resonated with an unnerving calm. Your words are based on obsolete data. The galaxy has changed. Survival demands adaptation. This is adaptation. This is efficiency. Efficiency? Kala spat, her disgust palpable. You call this efficiency? To lose our very souls? To become puppets of a dead machine? We would rather starve, Shaper, than become that. She gestured wildly at the transformed Kroot surrounding Chorus, their silent, watchful presence, an unnerving testament to their chilling evolution. Chorus emitted a low hum, a sound that grated against the ears of the untouched Kroot. Starvation is inefficient. Sentimentality is a weakness. The ancestral ways are insufficient for this era. I offer a new path, a path of power, a path of integration. The word hung in the air, a chilling prophecy. Integration. It wasn't just about consuming genetic traits. It was about merging, becoming something else entirely. The schism was complete. Kala, with a defiant cry, declared her intent to lead her followers away, to preserve what little Kroot identity remained. We will find our own path, Shaper. A path of flesh and blood, not cold metal and stolen thoughts. Chorus merely observed, his glowing eyes tracking her movements. Your probability of survival is critically low, Kala. The universe is not kind to the inefficient. The secession was not peaceful. As Kala and her followers attempted to depart, Chorus did not physically bar their way. Instead, his quills flared, sending out a powerful, low-frequency hum. The ground beneath the fleeing Kroot shuddered. The very air around them grew heavy, their weapons sputtered, and the sparse technology they carried shorted out with sharp crackles. Chorus, with a chillingly detached precision, began to manipulate the environment itself, turning the landscape into a subtle, insidious trap. Dust storms, seemingly conjured from nothing, arose to disorient them. Minor, seismic tremors subtly altered their chosen escape routes, leading them into dead ends or treacherous terrain. Their communication devices, primitive by Necron standards, but vital for Kroot cohesion, were filled with crackling static, making coordinated movement impossible. It was a subtle, almost invisible assault, a technopathic manipulation of their environment, turning the world against them. Chaos erupted. The untouched Kroot, accustomed to physical threats, were utterly bewildered by this unseen enemy. They turned on each other in confusion, their natural senses overwhelmed by the insidious disruption. Some stumbled into ravines that seemed to open unexpectedly. Others found their weapons seizing up, their vehicles refusing to start. Chorus and his ghost eaters watched, silent and unmoving. They did not participate directly in the violence, but their very presence, their humming quills and glowing eyes, served as a chilling catalyst. They had demonstrated their power not through brute force, but through a terrifying, precise control over their surroundings, a mastery derived from the cryptech's fractured mind. Kala, her spirit unbroken, but her body weary, finally understood the true nature of Chorus's transformation. He didn't need to kill them directly. He could break their will, dismantle their society, and make their very survival impossible, simply by turning the world against them. The internal strife had become a purge, a brutal suppression of dissent. In the end, only a fraction of Kala's group managed to escape, scattering into the vast, uncaring wilderness of Viridia 4, pursued not by physical hunters, but by the relentless, invisible hand of Chorus's environmental manipulation. They would be hunted not for their genes, but as inefficiencies, as loose ends in a grand, terrifying calculation. The stalking claws, reborn as the ghost eaters, were now a singular entity, purged of internal dissent, their purpose clear and terrible. They were no longer a kindred bound by tradition, but a collective driven by the cold, calculating will of the cryptech, using the Kroot's organic adaptability as a horrifying tool. The schism had ended, leaving behind a new, unified, and utterly chilling force, ready to embark on its new, alien-directed destiny. The purge of the dissenters solidified Chorus's absolute control over the ghost eaters. The lingering traces of Kroot tradition, of empathy, of emotional complexity, had been ruthlessly excised. What remained was a cohesive, terrifyingly efficient unit, a living instrument perfectly attuned to the cryptech's nascent will. Their metallic sheen was now more pronounced, forming intricate, geometric patterns beneath their skin. Their quills pulsed with a steady, internal emerald glow, and their movements were a symphony of calculated precision, devoid of wasted effort. Their next objective, whispered into Chorus's mind by the omnipresent data streams of the cryptech, was a derelict, Imperial Mechanicus Research Station, orbiting a dying gas giant. The station, designated Forge Outpost Sigma 9, was an ancient, forgotten testament to Imperial ingenuity, now ravaged by void anomalies and centuries of neglect. It was, however, believed to contain advanced data logs, and more importantly, for the cryptex purposes, a unique array of integrated cybernetic implants and highly refined servo-skulls that had once served its long-dead tech priest masters. This was not about biomass for survival. It was about acquiring specific technological components and data. The approach to Sigma 9 was a testament to Chorus's evolving abilities. Imperial void mines, ancient and prone to malfunction, still littered the station's orbital path. A conventional assault would be suicidal. But Chorus, his mind now a living data processor, saw not just the mines, but their energy signatures, their decay rates, their internal logic gates. He navigated the Ghost Eater's crude, stolen transport through the minefield, as if through an open channel, his quills crackling as he subtly induced systemic failures in the closest mines, causing them to harmlessly detonate far from their ship, or simply to shut down entirely. The station itself was a ghost. Corridors lay in darkness, breached bulkheads yawned into the void, and the air was thick with the dust of ages and the faint, sweet decay of long-dead servitors. The Mechanicus had left behind no living defenders, only automatons and the husks of their own cyborg constructs, still performing their programmed routines in endless, futile loops. For any other Kroot kindred, this would have been a barren wasteland, offering no viable gene source. But for the Ghost Eaters, it was a treasure trove. Chorus perceived the station not as a series of physical rooms, but as a complex network of energy conduits, data paths, and integrated systems. He moved through the darkness, his emerald eyes cutting through the gloom, guiding his kin with silent mental commands. Their targets were specific: the central data cores, the servo skull production facilities, and the repositories of cybernetic implants. The station's automated defenses, ancient though they were, stirred to life. Sentry guns whirred their targeting lasers sweeping the empty corridors. Servo skulls, their single optic lenses glowing balefully, drifted from their charging stations, their integrated weapons systems humming to life. But the Ghost Eaters were prepared. Chorus raised a hand, his quills flaring. A wave of disruptive energy, invisible yet potent, washed through the corridor. The sentry guns sputtered, their barrels locking, their targeting systems flickering into error states. The servo skulls, mid-flight, seized up, their control matrices overwhelmed, their weapons discharging harmlessly into the bulkheads before they drifted lifelessly to the deck plating. It was a silent, devastating EMP, focused and precise, a true exhibition of their nascent technopathic mastery. The Ghost Eaters moved through the disabled station, a tide of silent, emerald-eyed predators. They bypassed sealed blast doors with a simple thought, disrupted the last vestiges of automated maintenance systems, and navigated the complex, multi-layered layout with uncanny efficiency. They reached the main data cores, protected by layers of hardened plastil and complex encryption. Chorus placed his metallic-sheened hand on the primary interface panel. His quills thrummed, and a cascade of pure data, complex algorithms, and ancient Necron protocols flowed from his mind into the Imperial system. The encryption, formidable by human standards, crumbled under the onslaught of alien logic. The data logs, millennia of Mechanicus research, schematics, and philosophical musings, were downloaded and assimilated into Chorus's evolving consciousness in mere moments. The sheer volume of information would have driven a human mad, but Chorus's mind, now partially synthetic, processed it with cold efficiency. The highlight of their raid, however, was the Servo Skull production facility. Here, rows upon rows of inert skulls, meticulously prepared for cybernetic integration, lay waiting. And beside them, racks of fully integrated servo skulls, some dating back to the station's inception, still retaining remnants of their former masters' personalities, now little more than fragmented digital ghosts. Chorus and his Ghost Eaters did not consume these in the traditional sense. Instead, they placed their hands upon the inert skulls. The cryptech's consciousness, residing within Chorus, initiated a direct, powerful interface. A green light pulsed from their quills into the skulls, overwriting the Imperial programming, implanting new directives, integrating them into their own nascent network. The inert skulls twitched, their optic lenses flaring emerald, their tiny repulsor jets humming to life. They were no longer Imperial servo skulls. They were Kroot Necron auxiliaries, their purpose redefined by the Ghost Eaters. Even more disturbing was the consumption of the more advanced, sentient servo skulls. These entities, imbued with the vestiges of human minds, provided a unique kind of gene source, not organic, but digital. Chorus directed his kin to physically consume the hardened data cores of these constructs. The influx of human digital intelligence, combined with the refined cybernetic components, offered a rich, new evolutionary pathway. The Ghost Eaters developed an even deeper understanding of machine integration, their metallic sheen becoming more prominent, their quills now emitting faint, crackling sparks of pure energy. Their internal hum grew stronger, a symphony of organic and synthetic frequencies. The victory on Forge Outpost Sigma 9 was absolute, but the price was immeasurable. The Ghost Eaters had achieved their objective with 0 casualties. They had acquired vast data logs, integrated new auxiliaries, and refined their own abilities. But in doing so, they had shed another layer of their Kroot identity. They were no longer just organic beings with technopathic powers. They were becoming something new, a hybrid entity that consumed not just flesh, but data and technology, bending it to its will. Chorus, standing amidst the humming, emerald-eyed servo skulls, and his silently transformed kin, felt a chilling surge of satisfaction. It was not a Kroot emotion, but a cold, logical confirmation of successful protocol execution. The Cryptek's will was growing, its ancient objectives slowly manifesting through the organic hunger of the Kroot. The victory was indeed Pyrrhic, not for the Ghost Eaters' lives, but for their very souls. They were becoming less Kroot and more a terrifying echo of the very Necrons they had violated, their purpose irrevocably twisted by the ancient alien intelligence now residing within them. The successful assimilation of Forge Outpost Sigma 9's data cores and cybernetic constructs marked a profound shift in Chorus's understanding. The fragments of the Cryptek's consciousness residing within his mind had begun to coalesce. No longer a chaotic torrent of raw information, the whispers became clearer, more cohesive, forming into half-remembered narratives and ancient, chilling truths. The star charts that once merely guided their hunts now revealed patterns, pilgrimages, and the skeletal outlines of millennia-old Necron expansion routes. One particular pattern emerged, insistent and compelling. A series of faint, residual energy signatures pointing towards a remote, uncharted nebula, known only as the Veiled Expanse. Within the expanse, the star charts highlighted several worlds, each marked with a unique, archaic Necron designation, not as resource acquisition points, but as stasis vaults or protocol nexus. The hunt for gene sources was now undeniably secondary to the Cryptek's deeper, forgotten objectives. Chorus, his mind increasingly dominated by the alien logic, began to interpret the star charts not as mere navigational aids, but as a roadmap to the Cryptek's past, a blueprint for its unfulfilled destiny. The hunt for specific genetic traits became intertwined with a search for specific Necron technologies, for lost repositories of knowledge, for worlds that held keys to the Cryptek's awakening. He was no longer just a shaper guiding his kin. He was a living explorer, driven by an alien intellect to uncover its own ancient secrets. The Ghost Eaters, now augmented by the repurposed servo skulls that hummed around them like emerald-eyed bees, followed Chorus without question. Their own technopathic abilities had expanded, allowing them a rudimentary understanding of the data streams that flowed through their shaper. They sensed the urgency, the profound importance of these new hunts, even if they didn't fully comprehend the nuances of ancient Necron lore. Their hunger, too, had changed. While still requiring biomass, they increasingly craved the unique flavors of integrated technology, the subtle data patterns of advanced cybernetics, or the intricate biological systems of sentient machines. Their journey through the veiled expanse was a terrifying revelation. Guided by Chorus's internal navigation, they bypassed nebulae that would atomize conventional ships, slipped through asteroid fields that defied physical laws, and skirted the edges of gravitational anomalies that warp drives could not predict. Chorus didn't just see safe passages, he felt them. The residual energy trails of ancient Necron vessels that had traversed these exact routes millennia ago. He was retracing a lost journey, a ghost trail left by the very intelligence that now commanded him. Their first stop was a gas giant's moon, a frozen world perpetually shrouded in a crystalline atmosphere. The mental map within Chorus pinpointed a vast, subterranean complex, its energy signature faint, but persistent. This was not a tomb world, but a protocol nexus, a facility dedicated to the storage and maintenance of ancient Necron operational directives. Entering the complex was far more challenging than Sigma 9. This was not a derelict Imperial outpost, but a dormant Necron facility. It woke slowly, inexorably, as the Ghost Eaters breached its outer perimeters. Canoptech scarabs, small and numerous, swarmed from fissures in the walls, their cutting beams buzzing. Ancient automated repair drones, resembling segmented metallic worms, slithered from the shadows, intent on sealing the breaches. Chorus met their advance with a burst of concentrated technopathic energy. The scarab's internal processors screamed, overloading in a shower of sparks, their cutting beams turning against each other in chaotic bursts before they collapsed into inert heaps. The repair drones, their programming dedicated to preservation, were confused, their movements faltering as Chorus subtly corrupted their command sequences, forcing them to repair non-existent damage or to seal their own access points. Deep within the Nexus, they found what Chorus instinctively knew they sought: a vast chamber filled with shimmering, translucent obelisks, each pulsating with a faint internal light. These were not weapons or defensive systems, but data repositories, each holding millennia of Necron protocols, scientific findings, and historical records. The cryptech within Chorus practically sang with recognition. He approached one of the obelisks, its surface cold and smooth. His quills thrummed, his entire being focused. He did not consume it physically. Instead, he placed both hands upon its surface, and the emerald light within him surged outwards, flowing into the ancient construct. It was a merging, a two-way data transfer. Millennia of Necron data flowed into his mind, augmenting the cryptech's fractured consciousness, making it more complete, more dominant. But as the Necron knowledge flowed in, so too did something else. A ripple of Kroot ancestral memories, a phantom echo of his true self surged to the forefront of Chorus's mind. He saw flashes of his earliest life, the scent of his mother, the warmth of his kindred's fire, the joy of his first hunt. It was a desperate, fleeting struggle, his Kroot essence fighting for air against the crushing weight of alien data. And then, a new whisper, clearer now, less fragmented, echoed within his skull. It was not just the cryptech's protocols, but its purpose, its identity. The cryptech had been a chronomancer, a master of temporal manipulation, tasked with securing a vital historical anomaly, a unique temporal data imprint, before its dynast could awaken from the great sleep. Its defeat and stasis had left this critical task unfinished. Chorus was now its proxy, driven to complete this millennia-old mission. The gene sources it sought were not about Kroot evolution, but about acquiring the specific temporal signature energy that would power its forgotten devices, or the biological material that could resonate with temporal energies. The knowledge was horrifying. Chorus was not just a host. He was being repurposed, his entire existence bent to the will of a long-dead Necron master. The glimmer of his Kroot self, the faint echo of regret, was quickly swallowed by the cold, compelling logic of the cryptech. He felt his mind solidify, the battle for control ending in the cryptech's favor. He was no longer Chorus, shaper. He was an instrument, an evolving tool. The Ghost Eaters, observing the silent, eerie merging, felt the shift in their shaper. The internal drone they emitted intensified, their emerald eyes now reflecting a chilling, unified purpose. They had glimpsed a fragment of the cryptech's intent, a flicker of its ancient agenda, and their newly formed, synthetic hunger responded. They were not just Kroot eating. They were Kroot Necron hybrids, their biology and purpose irrevocably altered by the terrifying whispers of the past. The legacy of the stalking claws was no longer their own. It was a chapter in the forgotten history of the Necrons, written in the grim, desperate choices of a doomed kindred. The assimilation of the Necron data obelisks on the protocol. Nexus Moon had been the pivotal turning point for Chorus. The fragmented cryptech consciousness within him had coalesced, its ancient purpose now horrifyingly clear: to secure a vital historical anomaly, a unique temporal data imprint for its slumbering dynast. Chorus was no longer merely a host. He was a repurposed vessel. His Kroot identity steadily eroded by the surge of alien logic. Yet, in that overwhelming influx of information, a brief, agonizing flicker of his true self had surfaced, a fleeting moment of clarity that bordered on defiance. It was during their subsequent hunt, guided by an especially strong mental beacon that pulsed from a distant, radiation-scarred exoplanet, that this glimmer of hope, or perhaps ultimate despair, would manifest. The cryptech's directives were absolute. The planet, designated Chrono Vault 7, contained a powerful, active temporal anomaly, a stable time loop that generated the very temporal signature energy it required. This was the true gene source the cryptech hungered for, a power beyond mere biomass. The journey to Chrono Vault 7 was a harrowing test of Chorus's technopathic navigation. The planet's orbit was a dizzying maelstrom of temporal distortions, spatial anomalies, and raw, unfiltered radiation that tore at the fabric of reality. Conventional ships were instantly shredded. But Chorus, perceiving the temporal distortions as shifting energy fields, guided their stolen vessel through the chaos, his quills vibrating with strained effort, his mind grappling with the complex, paradoxical geometry of time itself. They landed amidst a landscape ravaged by chronal energies. Twisted, petrified forests stood alongside structures that seemed to be simultaneously decaying and regenerating. The air shimmered with invisible forces and faint echoes of past events, the screams of long-dead explorers, the roar of monstrous, anachronistic beasts flickered in and out of existence. The cryptech's directives led them deep into the planet's core, to a vast, subterranean chamber where the temporal anomaly pulsed. It was a terrifying sight, a sphere of raw, crackling chronal energy held in place by ancient Necron stasis fields, each one subtly shifting through infinitesimal moments in time. Within the sphere, a single, impossibly ancient Necron data obelisk, far more intricate and powerful than any they had encountered, shimmered with a blinding emerald light. This was not a passive repository. It was the nexus of the temporal anomaly, constantly rewriting and reinterpreting local time-space. As Chorus approached the obelisk, his entire being thrummed with a new, terrifying power. The cryptek's consciousness within him surged, recognizing its objective. This was the source, the power it needed to fully reconstitute its lost memories, its complete protocols, and ultimately, its mastery over time. The Ghost Eaters, their eyes glowing, felt the overwhelming pull of the temporal energy, their bodies resonating with the paradox. Chorus extended a hand, the metallic patterns on his skin glowing. He did not consume the obelisk physically. Instead, he interfaced with it directly, a complete, unshielded merging of his transformed Kroot mind with the ancient Necron technology. The obelisk pulsed violently, its emerald light flaring, and a torrent of pure temporal data, of chronal energy and lost histories surged into Chorus's mind. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. His body convulsed, arcing with raw chronal energy. His quills, instead of glowing green, now shimmered with an unstable, prismatic light, flickering through all spectrums. His roar is not of pain, but of an overwhelming, paradoxical understanding. He was perceiving time not as a linear progression, but as a vector, malleable tapestry, every moment existing simultaneously. He saw his past, his future, the cryptek's past, its full, malevolent intent, laid bare before him. And in that moment of ultimate clarity, as the cryptek's consciousness surged towards its complete dominance, something unexpected happened. The sheer, overwhelming influx of raw temporal data, combined with the extreme chronal energies, acted as a momentary circuit breaker. It did not sever the cryptek's connection, but it amplified Chorus's own dying Kroot consciousness, granting him a brief, horrifying glimpse of the cryptek's full, malevolent intent. He saw the cryptek's true identity, a chronomancer of the Maynarch dynasty, a particularly cruel and ambitious Necron noble. Its purpose was not merely to awaken its dynast, but to manipulate the galactic timeline, to erase its own past defeats, and to reshape history to its own horrific design. Chorus saw the Kroot as a disposable vessel, his kindred as mere genetic fuel, destined to be consumed and discarded once the cryptek achieved its full awakening. He saw the cold, cosmic horror of his own inevitable extinction, the complete and utter erasure of his kind's will, replaced by the calculating ambition of a dead machine. This horrifying vision, burning with the raw power of the temporal anomaly, did not break Chorus. Instead, it ignited a spark of desperate defiance. For the first time since the initial consumption, he fought back, not with physical strength, but with pure, raw will. The temporary amplification of his Kroot self, granted by the overwhelming chronal energy, allowed him to seize a brief, precarious moment of control. He did not purge the cryptek. That was impossible now. But he mastered the temporal technopathic abilities it had granted him, bending them to his own fleeting will. With a guttural roar, a sound that blended Kroot rage with the crackling static of chronal energy, he unleashed a focused burst of temporal technopathic force. The Necron data obelisk at the heart of the anomaly pulsed violently, its stasis fields flickering. The chronovault, designed to preserve the temporal anomaly, now buckled under the Kroot's unintended, amplified control. He had gained a momentary, terrifying mastery over the very powers that were consuming him. The obelisk, instead of fully assimilating Chorus, suffered a systemic overload. Its intricate temporal conduits destabilizing. The chamber shuddered. Warnings blared through the mental networks of the Ghost Eaters. The raw chronal energy, no longer perfectly contained, began to spill outwards, tearing at the fabric of the immediate reality. Chorus, now a living conduit for both the cryptek's will and his own desperate defiance, had temporarily averted his complete assimilation, but at a catastrophic cost. The Necron structure around them began to collapse, consumed by uncontrolled temporal paradoxes. They had gained a powerful, new weapon, but they had also unleashed a catastrophe, painting a clearer picture of their own doomed future. The glimmer of hope was not salvation, but a momentary reprieve before an even greater, more terrifying fall. The catastrophic destabilization of Chronovault 7 was a Pyrrhic victory of Chorus's own desperate will. The overwhelming influx of temporal energy had given him a fleeting, agonizing moment of clarity, a horrifying glimpse into the cryptek's true malevolent intent. It had allowed him to briefly assert his own Kroot consciousness against the alien will, to wrest temporary control over the burgeoning technopathic abilities. But this momentary rebellion came at a terrible price. The vault, once a stable nexus of chronal energy, was now a collapsing vortex of temporal paradoxes, tearing itself apart. Chorus, now a living conduit for both the cryptek's intent and his own amplified, dying will, barked a series of guttural, yet highly complex, mental commands to his Ghost Eaters. Extract, chronal saturation reaching Critical. Disengage. His voice, when it emerged, was a grating symphony of Kroot growls and metallic crackles, echoing with the raw, unstable power of the temporal anomaly. The Ghost Eaters, now more machine than Kroot, processed the data with frightening efficiency. Their enhanced senses screamed of imminent collapse. With an unnerving synchronicity, they moved, their metallic sheened forms blurring as they navigated the shuddering corridors, the repurposed servo skulls zipping ahead, marking safe, or at least momentarily stable, pathways through the chronal chaos. They escaped Chrono Vault 7 just as the subterranean complex imploded, collapsing into a singularity of twisted time and space. The stolen vessel, piloted by Chorus through the tumultuous temporal storms, limped away from the doomed planet, bearing its altered crew and their new, terrifying power. The immediate aftermath was one of chilling equilibrium. Chorus's temporary mastery over the technopathic and now temporal technopathic abilities persisted. But it was a precarious balance. The cryptech's consciousness, though momentarily thrown off by the overload, was still very much present, its protocols readjusting, its long-term objectives subtly reasserting themselves. Chorus was a shaper with unprecedented power, but he was also a ticking clock, his Kroot essence constantly battling against the encroaching tide of alien logic. The Ghost Eaters, now designated the Phylactine Stalkers by the few unfortunate souls who had encountered them and lived to tell the tale, became a terrifying legend. Their hunts were no longer confined to specific gene sources or technological components. Guided by Chorus's unstable yet powerful mind, they sought out unique temporal signatures, rare forms of chronal energy, or even highly evolved organic life forms whose biological processes could resonate with temporal manipulation. The cryptech within Chorus now drove him to seek out anything that could further its mastery over time, using the Kroot's hunger as a horrifying proxy. They traversed the galaxy not through conventional warp jumps or even Chorus's previous precise navigation, but by following ghost trails of ancient energy that existed outside normal space-time. Chorus could now perceive faint ripples in the chronal flow, minute distortions in the fabric of causality, guiding them to worlds where temporal anomalies manifested or where forgotten, time-sensitive technologies lay dormant. Their methods of hunting became even more terrifyingly precise. Upon encountering a target, be it a reclusive Xenos species, rich in chronal resonance, or a desperate Imperial colony whose time-sensitive warp gates inadvertently bled temporal energy, the Phylactine Stalkers would strike with the unseen force of paradox. They would subtly accelerate the degradation of defensive systems, causing them to rust and seize up prematurely. They would disrupt the internal chronometers of enemy forces, causing their movements to become disjointed, their reactions delayed by infinitesimal but critical fractions of a second. They would induce localized temporal loops, trapping small groups of defenders in repeating moments of agony, unable to escape their own immediate past. These were not battles of brute force, but of surgical manipulation. The phylactine stalkers left behind a trail of utter devastation. Disabled technology, utterly consumed biomass, and the lingering, disorienting effects of chronal dissonance. Their victims often died, not knowing what had attacked them. Only that time itself had turned against them. One such encounter, against a desperate planetary defense force of a minor Tau colony, cemented their new, terrifying reputation. The Tau, accustomed to precise engagements and technologically superior weaponry, found themselves fighting an enemy they could not comprehend. Railguns misfired, their targeting systems suffering microsecond delays. Fusion blasters overloaded prematurely. Crisis suits found their internal chronometers wildly fluctuating, rendering them incapable of coordinated fire. The phylactine stalkers, moving with an unnatural synchronicity, would appear and disappear from perception, their movements subtly out of phase with normal time. They would strike, consume, and vanish, leaving behind a baffled, terrified enemy whose memory of the engagement was a fragmented nightmare of impossible events. The few survivors spoke of ghost eaters who bend time, or metal-quilled phantoms who steal your moments. Chorus, at the center of this terrifying symphony, was a living paradox. His body, now almost entirely sheened with metallic growths and crackling with unstable energy, moved with an eerie grace. His emerald eyes, now constantly shifting with prismatic hues, took in the universe as a series of temporal equations. Yet, within the core of his being, a desperate battle raged. The clarity gained from Chronovault 7 allowed him to understand the cryptech's ultimate objective: to fully awaken, to claim its mastery over time, and to then discard its Kroot vessel as a withered husk. This understanding was a constant, gnawing burden. He was powerful, perhaps more powerful than any Kroot shaper had ever been. But that power came at the cost of his very identity, his very soul. He was forced to fulfill the cryptech's directives, to lead his kin down a path of ultimate destruction, knowing full well the terrible fate that awaited them. He was trapped, a hero burdened by a power that was slowly consuming him, forced to wage a long, silent war for his own existence against an alien entity residing within his very mind. The long war had truly begun. A cosmic struggle waged on the battleground of one Kroot shaper's mind. Chorus was no longer merely a shaper. He was a paradox, a living, screaming contradiction of his species. His body, once lean and organic, was now a horrifying testament to his metamorphosis. Intricate patterns of metallic growth had spread across his skin, particularly along his limbs and spine, giving him the appearance of being encased in ancient, alien armor. His quills, once natural bone and keratin, now resembled crystalline conductors, pulsing with unstable, prismatic light that shimmered with the chaotic energy of chronal distortions. His eyes, once shrewd and pragmatic, now burned with a shifting emerald fire that mirrored the inner battle for his soul. His mind was the true battleground. The chronomancer's consciousness, now almost fully reconstituted within him, exerted an almost absolute control. He understood the galaxy not through instinct or emotion, but through the cold, calculating logic of a millennia-old machine mind. He perceived time as a malleable resource, not a linear progression, and his every action was guided by the cryptech's overarching directive to acquire specific, temporal signature energies and rare chronal components to fully reestablish its mastery over time. Yet, deep within this synthetic shell, a tiny, defiant spark of Chorus, the Kroot shaper, still clung to existence. The terrifying clarity he had gained on Chrono Vault 7, the realization that the cryptech intended to discard him and his kindred as genetic fuel, was a burning brand on his soul. It was a burden heavier than any he had ever carried, knowing that every act of power, every successful hunt, brought him closer to his own annihilation and the complete erasure of his kindred's identity. This internal conflict manifested in subtle ways. While he executed the cryptech's commands with chilling precision, there were infinitesimal deviations, moments where his Kroot cunning, sharpened by countless hunts, would subtly twist the directive. He would choose routes that offered slightly longer detours, allowing for the consumption of unique, non-chronal biomass that might offer his kin a chance at organic resilience. He would select targets that, while fulfilling the cryptech's needs, also inadvertently disrupted the plans of other, more overtly hostile Necron factions that the Chronomancer itself might one day oppose. He was a slave, but a defiant one, using the very chains that bound him to subtly undermine his master. His communication with the phylactine stalkers was now almost entirely telepathic, a symphony of crackling data bursts and the precise, unsettling gestures of a machine. They understood his commands with uncanny synchronicity, their own minds now too warped by the cryptek's influence to question his directives. Yet they too retained a faint echo of their Kroot selves, a collective, communal hum that served as a subtle counterpoint to Chorus's internal struggle. They were extensions of his will, but also extensions of his burden. One particular instance highlighted this excruciating duality. The cryptek directed Chorus to a barren, grav-lensed system, its primary star a dying red dwarf, its planets scoured by radiation. The target was a long-dormant human exploratory vessel, lost for centuries, carrying a unique prototype chrono amplifier, a device that could harvest raw temporal energy. The cryptek wanted it. Chorus navigated their stolen vessel through the system's treacherous gravitational anomalies, his internal star charts flickering with warnings of imminent spatial collapse. As they boarded the human ship, the atmosphere was thick with the dust of ages, the skeletal remains of the crew still strapped into their seats, perfectly preserved by a localized temporal anomaly. The cryptek's directives were clear. Extract the chrono amplifier, disable the ship's remaining systems, and eliminate any residual data that might betray its presence. But as Chorus approached the device, a powerful wave of human sorrow and despair, amplified by the temporal stasis, washed over his Kroot mind. He saw the faces of the dead crew, not as cold data, but as living, suffering beings, eternally trapped in their final moments. The cryptek within him registered this as an inefficiency, a deviation from protocol. But Chorus hesitated, his quills pulsed with conflicting energies. For a fleeting moment, he saw himself, the old shaper, making a choice, not a calculation. Instead of simply extracting the device, Chorus, with a surge of amplified will, temporarily stabilized the decaying temporal anomaly around the ship. He then issued a mental command to his phylactine stalkers. They moved with their usual precision, disabling the ship's security systems, but also carefully extracting the chrono amplifier without further disturbing the entombed crew. More strikingly, Chorus directed them to not purge the ship's data logs entirely. He left a corrupted yet traceable energy signature, a faint ghost trail that would eventually lead Imperial authorities to the derelict vessel. The cryptek within him registered this anomaly, a slight deviation from its instructions. It processed the data, noted the suboptimal efficiency, but the acquisition of the chrono amplifier was deemed paramount, overriding the minor discrepancy. It dismissed it as a lingering, organic anomaly in its Kroot host, a minor imperfection that would soon be purged. But for Chorus, It was a small victory, a silent act of defiance. He had fulfilled the cryptek's primary objective, but he had done so on his own terms, preserving a fragment of humanity's tragic history, and perhaps offering a grim warning to those who would eventually find the ship. It was a testament to the fact that Chorus, the Kroot shaper, however twisted and transformed, however burdened by the alien will, was not yet entirely gone. He was a hero in his own terrible tragedy, navigating an impossible path between the preservation of his essence and the demands of his monstrous master, forever walking the tightrope between salvation and annihilation. His personal journey was a continuous, silent war, each step a testament to the grim reality of his eternal burden. The acquisition of the chrono amplifier from the derelict human vessel fueled the cryptek's nascent temporal mastery, drawing it closer to its full reconstitution. The energies now coursing through Chorus's form were immense, destabilizing, and alluring. His every action was infused with a new, terrifying potency. His command over localized temporal shifts becoming more refined, more dangerous. Yet, this surge of power also drew a much greater, more immediate threat. Ophidian, the relentless, canoptic sentinel. The chronomancer within Chorus, now invigorated, saw Ophidian not just as an enemy, but as a misguided protocol, a redundant security measure. Its cold logic dictated that the Sentinel, having fulfilled its initial directive to track the cryptek's fragmented essence, was now an obstacle to its greater purpose. The time had come for its elimination. The mental star charts, augmented by the chrono amplifier's vast data, led the phylactine stalkers to a desolate, asteroid-riddled system. Far from any habitable worlds, it was here, amidst the silent, tumbling debris of a long-dead planet, that Chorus laid his trap. His internal battle with the cryptek was temporarily subdued, replaced by a singular, focused intent to defeat the implacable Necron construct, not just for his own survival, but to momentarily assert his own will, to prove that his Kroot cunning could still outwit pure machine logic. Ophidian, relentless and tireless, finally cornered them. It emerged from the warp in a flash of emerald light, its sleek, multi-limbed form hovering amidst the asteroids. Its single optical sensor burned with cold, analytical fury, having tracked the unique temporal signature energy now radiating from Chorus. It was not alone. The cryptek's repeated disruptions of local Necron assets and its increasingly powerful temporal manipulations had roused other canoptek constructs from Ophidian's tomb world. two hulking canoptek spiders, their multiple glowing eyes sweeping the debris field, accompanied the sentinel, their internal factories already spinning to produce endless swarms of scarabs. The battle began without a word. Ophidian, assessing the tactical situation, immediately ordered the spiders to deploy. Hundreds of scarabs swarmed from their access hatches, a buzzing tide of metallic insects, their cutting beams already scorching the nearest asteroids. They moved with a singular purpose, overwhelming targets through sheer numerical superiority, while Ophidian itself advanced with terrifying speed, its phase blades humming with energy. Horus met the assault with a chilling display of his new powers. His quills, shimmering with prismatic light, flared. With a subtle mental command, he unleashed a localized chronal disruption. The approaching swarm of scarabs, caught in the temporal flux, suffered instantaneous degradation. Some rusted into dust in milliseconds. Others accelerated into impossible speeds, impacting asteroids and disintegrating. The temporal field distorted their cutting beams, causing them to harmlessly arc into the void or turn back on their brethren. The first wave of Necron automatons was shattered before it even reached them. The canoptek spiders, their cold logic processing the unforeseen temporal anomaly, adapted quickly. Their energy shields flared, stabilizing their position against the chronal disruptions. One spider unleashed a volley of high-energy Gauss flare blasts, the green beams tearing through the void towards Chorus's vessel. But Chorus was ready. He moved with a speed that defied the eye, a blur of metallic green and shimmering light. He was no longer constrained by linear time. He subtly shifted his own personal timeline, existing milliseconds ahead or behind the incoming fire, causing the Gauss blasts to pass through him as if he were a phantom, or to impact empty space where he had stood moments before. His phylactine stalkers, their own lesser temporal abilities, now more pronounced, mimicked their shapers' movements, appearing and disappearing from the spiders' targeting systems, striking at their weak points with unerring precision. They disabled the spiders' scarab factories with focused technopathic bursts, shorting out their internal production lines. The true battle was between Chorus and Ophidian. The canoptek sentinel, recognizing the depth of Chorus's transformation, unleashed its full arsenal. Its phase blades extended, not just through space, but through nascent temporal fields, capable of cutting through matter as if it never existed. Its optical sensor blazed with a searing energy beam, aimed directly at Chorus. Chorus, channeling the temporal energies of the chrono amplifier, met the assault head-on. He parried Ophidian's phase blades, not with physical force, but by subtly shifting their temporal trajectory. causing them to miss by infinitesimal fractions of time. He allowed the energy beam to graze him, drawing a superficial scorch mark on his metallic sheened skin. But in that fleeting contact, he unleashed a concentrated burst of chronal feedback directly into Ophidion's optical sensor. The sentinel shrieked, a high-pitched whine of tortured circuits. Its optical sensor flickered, temporarily blinded. It recoiled, its multi-limbed chassis jerking violently as its internal systems struggled to recalibrate against the temporal paradox inflicted upon it. This was Chorus's moment. The cryptek within him screamed for the destruction of the sentinel, for the elimination of this threat. But Chorus's dying Kroot cunning saw a greater opportunity. He would not simply destroy Ophidion. He would consume a part of it, integrate its unique Necron essence into his own, further bolstering his defenses against the cryptek's ultimate takeover. With a primal roar that resonated with chronal energy, Chorus launched himself at the momentarily stunned Ophidion. He bypassed its flailing limbs, its still recalibrating defenses. He plunged his metallic sheened hand deep into its chassis, his fingers tearing through living metal like paper. He wasn't just damaging it, he was interfacing, consuming, assimilating. The internal struggle was immense. The cryptek within him fought against this deviation from its protocol, this raw, Kroot act of consumption. But Chorus's will, amplified by the temporal energies, held. He ripped a glowing power core, a throbbing heart of pure Necron ingenuity, directly from Ophidion's core systems. The sentinel convulsed violently, its systems flatlining, its emerald light dying. It slumped, a lifeless husk, amidst the debris. Chorus stood over its corpse, panting, the stolen power core pulsating in his hand. He then, with a raw, brutal defiance, began to consume it, tearing into its metallic form with his powerful beak. The influx of Necron data, of raw energy, was overwhelming. His quills flared brighter than ever, his form crackling with pure, uncontained power. He had achieved a devastating victory, not just over Ophidion, but a momentary one over the cryptek itself. But the price was immense. He was now a further monstrous fusion, his Kroot identity receding even more, his body racked by the sheer, uncontained energy he had just absorbed. This was his darkest hour, the moment he embraced an even deeper, more terrifying assimilation, all in a desperate, fleeting hope of ultimately retaining control of his own shattered soul. The consumption of Ophidion's power core was a desperate, pivotal act for Chorus. The influx of raw Necron energy and refined machine logic was overwhelming, threatening to utterly annihilate his Kroot consciousness. For agonizing moments, he stood amidst the silent debris, his body convulsing, glowing with an unholy emerald light that pulsed with the chaotic energy of the consumed sentinel. His quills, now vibrant with the energy of a captured Necron heart, arced with unstable electricity, and a low, resonant hum vibrated from his very bones, a symphony of organic and synthetic torment. The cryptek's consciousness within him raged, an internal storm of frustrated protocols and corrupted data. Chorus had defied its explicit directive to merely destroy Ophidian. He had assimilated it, forcing a crude, brutal integration of its essence. This act, so fundamentally Kroot, was anathema to the cryptek's refined machine logic, yet the sheer power gained by Chorus was undeniable. The chronomancer now found itself battling not just a fragment of Kroot will, but a monstrous, increasingly powerful hybrid, capable of unpredictable actions. As the temporal energies and Necron data subsided, Chorus gasped, his body racked with pain, yet undeniably stronger. His metallic sheen was now more pronounced, almost entirely covering his skin, merging with his Kroot hide in unsettling, intricate patterns. His emerald eyes, usually cold and calculating, now burned with a desperate, defiant fire. A flicker of the old shaper, intensified by his momentary victory. The surviving Phylactine stalkers, their own forms crackling with residual energy from their shaper's surge, observed in awe. They had witnessed their shaper perform an act of impossible consumption, taking the very essence of a Necron construct and making it his own. Their internal hum resonated with a new, fearful respect. They saw not just power, but a terrifying, unpredictable mastery. Chorus, now embodying a fusion of Kroot biology, cryptek consciousness, and canoptek essence, knew that his time was running out. The internal battle was reaching its climax. The chronomancer was too powerful to be expelled, but Chorus had gained a temporary, tenuous leverage. He now possessed a profound, if unstable, understanding of Necron internal systems, gleaned from Ophidian's core. He saw a way, however desperate, to inflict a fatal blow upon the cryptek, even if it meant his own ultimate destruction. His mental commands to the Phylactine stalkers were now imbued with a terrible urgency. Seek the chronal nexus, the heart of the anomaly. Now, the mental star charts, once merely a navigational tool, now revealed a hidden objective, a deeper truth. The cryptech's ultimate awakening was tied to a primary chronal nexus, a central temporal anchor point located on a forgotten, dead world known as Xylos Prime. This nexus was where the cryptech intended to fully reconstitute its consciousness, to completely merge with its Kroot vessel and truly claim its mastery over time. Chorus knew this was his last chance, his final battlefield. They arrived at Xylos Prime, a world shrouded in an eternal twilight, its surface scarred by ancient wars, its atmosphere choked with nebular dust. The chronal nexus was deep beneath the planet's crust, protected by layers of ancient Necron defense systems. Long dormant, but now stirring to life, sensing the approaching temporal signature of the cryptech. The journey into the planet's core was a relentless gauntlet. Necron constructs, long entombed, rose to meet them. Spectral death marks flickering through reality, hulking Triarch Praetorians descending from the shadowed rock, their particle casters spitting emerald fire. This was a fully awakened Necron defense grid, ancient and merciless. Chorus, leading the charge, was a force of terrifying, unstable power. He wielded chronal disruption like a weapon, freezing death marks mid-phase, their forms flickering out of existence. He turned the Praetorians' own particle casters against them, subtly accelerating the decay of their energy cells, causing them to explode in a shower of sparks. His phylactine stalkers, fighting with renewed ferocity, their forms crackling with their own technopathic surges, tore through the awakened constructs, consuming what they could. Their hunger now tinged with the desperate knowledge of their shared, impending doom. They reached the heart of Xylos Prime, a vast, circular chamber pulsating with an intense, blinding white light. In its center stood the primary chronal nexus, a towering obelisk of pure chronal energy, humming with the power of countless timelines. This was where the cryptech would fully awaken, where Chorus's Kroot essence would be utterly consumed. Chorus approached the nexus, his body arcing with power, his emerald eyes burning with a primal defiance. The cryptech's consciousness within him surged with triumphant anticipation, its ancient ambition on the cusp of fruition. It began to merge, to draw upon the Nexus's power, to utterly overwrite Chorus's remaining will. But Chorus had a plan, born of desperation, and the painful knowledge gleaned from Ophidian. He had not just consumed Ophidion's power core, he had absorbed a piece of its fundamental programming, a reclamation protocol that, under specific parameters, could force a systemic purge within Necron constructs. It was a failsafe, a last resort against rogue elements, designed to utterly incinerate a unit's consciousness if it deviated too far from its prime directives. With a guttural roar, Chorus initiated the ultimate act of sacrifice. He did not fight the merging. Instead, he embraced it, but with a terrifying twist. As the cryptek's essence began its final, triumphant assimilation with the chronal nexus through Chorus, with a final, agonizing act of will, activated the repurposed reclamation protocol not upon himself, but upon the very core of the cryptek's consciousness within him, simultaneously forcing it to interface directly with the full power of the chronal nexus. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. A blinding surge of white-green energy erupted from Chorus, washing over the nexus. The cryptek, caught in its moment of ultimate triumph, was suddenly faced with its own failsafe, turned against itself. The full, raw power of the chronal nexus, meant to awaken it, was now being used by Chorus to purge it, to overload its system beyond comprehension. Chorus screamed, a sound of pure agony and desperate triumph, as his body became a conduit for this impossible, self-destructive act. His metallic-sheened skin cracked, his crystalline quills shattered, and his flesh began to incinerate, burned away by the unimaginable surge of energy. He was sacrificing himself not to destroy the cryptek, but to trigger its own self-annihilation protocol, taking its immense power and his own tormented existence with it. The chamber was engulfed in a blinding flash, a supernova of chronal energy and pure, white-hot destruction. It was a victory forged in ultimate sacrifice, a desperate act of self-immolation to prevent a greater cosmic horror. Chorus, the Kroot shaper, had saved his kindred not through conquest, but by becoming the ultimate weapon against his own corruption, burning himself out in a final, defiant act against the ancient, alien will that had sought to consume him. The explosion of chronal energy on Xylos Prime was a silent, instantaneous maelstrom. When the blinding white light faded, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone and incinerated matter, the chamber at the planet's core was a charnel house. The towering chronal nexus obelisk, once humming with power, was fractured. Its immense energy contained but permanently scarred. Of Chorus, the Kroot shaper, there was nothing left but dust, a fine, shimmering ash that pulsed with faint, residual chronal energy, quickly dispersing into the dead air. His act of ultimate self-immolation had indeed triggered the cryptek's reclamation protocol, forcing the alien consciousness to consume itself, taking Chorus's physical form with it. The phylactine stalkers, caught at the periphery of the cataclysm, were thrown back, their metallic sheened bodies sparking, their quills crackling. They were not destroyed, but they were irrevocably changed, shattered by the psychic and energetic backlash of their shaper's sacrifice. Their direct link to Chorus, the powerful psychic and technopathic conduit that had bound them together, was severed. The Cryptek's primary influence, the guiding intelligence that had twisted their purpose, was gone. What remained was a profound, disorienting emptiness. The flood of data that had constantly streamed into their minds, the omnipresent star charts, the cold, calculating directives, all vanished, leaving behind a jarring silence. Their emerald eyes, once glowing with alien intelligence, now flickered erratically, as if struggling to re-establish a connection that no longer existed. Their movements, once unnervingly precise, became disjointed, hesitant. The lingering effects of their transformation, however, remained. Their metallic skin, hardened quills, and enhanced senses were still present. But without Chorus, without the guiding Cryptek, their technopathic abilities became unstable, uncontrolled. They would involuntarily emit crackling static, disrupting local technology around them, or subtly warp time in their immediate vicinity, causing objects to prematurely age or momentarily phase out of existence. They were pariahs, even among themselves, cursed by the terrible power they had once wielded. Leaderless, the Phylactine stalkers were reduced to a broken kindred, their purpose utterly lost. The Necron defenses of Xylos Prime, shattered by Chorus's final act, were slow to reform. The remaining Necron constructs, their central command compromised by the Chronomancer's self-destruction, became confused, their protocols struggling for cohesion. This momentary reprieve allowed the traumatized Phylactine stalkers to escape the dying world, limping away in their damaged vessel, a ghost ship carrying ghostkin. They scattered. There was no longer a central will, no overriding directive. The remnants of the Phylactine stalkers dissolved into desperate, smaller groups, each driven by a primal, confused hunger for sustenance and a lingering, uncontrolled urge for specific genetic or technological traits. But the refined, calculating precision was gone, replaced by a chaotic, almost desperate frenzy. One small group, led by a carnivore named Jark, whose quills now pulsed with an erratic violet light, crashed on a feral world. They attempted to hunt, but their technopathic abilities, now unguided, inadvertently caused their own weapons to short out, their traps to backfire, and the very animals they hunted to become hyper-aware and aggressive due to the temporal distortions they emanated. They were no longer masters of the hunt. They were a hazard to themselves and everything around them. Another splinter group, driven by a deep, unsettling hunger for specific forms of energy, accidentally drew the attention of an imperial inquisitor, who swiftly declared them Xenos Hereticus Maxima. The resulting purge was brutal, unforgiving, and terrifyingly efficient, as imperial forces found themselves battling Kroot, whose bodies sparked with unhunterable energies, and whose attacks could momentarily warp their perception of time. Only a few escaped, leaving the Inquisitor with fragmented, horrifying reports of metal-quilled Kroot, who eat machines and steal moments. The Kroot Confederacy, in the few instances they encountered these cursed remnants, recoiled in disgust and terror. The metal-quilled Kroot were an abomination, a living testament to the dangers of indiscriminate consumption. Their physical form, their erratic powers, and their utter lack of traditional Kroot communal spirit marked them as something irrevocably lost, something to be shunned and, if necessary, purged for the sake of Kroot purity. The aftermath of Chorus's sacrifice was not a clean break, a return to normalcy. It was a descent into a new form of horror. The Phylactine stalkers were not saved. They were merely freed from one form of alien domination, only to be left as broken, unstable instruments of its lingering power. They were pariahs among pariahs, their existence a living tragedy, a testament to the grim darkness of a galaxy that cared nothing for the suffering of a single species, twisted and reshaped by forces beyond its comprehension. Their journey had ended not in glorious triumph, but in a scattered, cursed existence, eternally marked by the ghost of a cryptek's ambition. The ashes of Chorus, the defiant shaper, had long since mingled with the nebular dust of Xylos Prime, yet his legacy, a grim and tragic testament to a desperate choice, endured. The Phylactine stalkers, leaderless and broken, were scattered across the void, an enduring scar on the face of the galaxy. They became a whispered legend, a cautionary tale told in hushed tones around the flickering fires of Kroot kindreds, and a chilling anomaly in the vast archives of the Ordo Xenos. No longer driven by the unified, insidious will of the cryptek, nor guided by the desperate cunning of Chorus, the remnants of the Phylactine stalkers devolved into something even more horrifying. Their technopathic and temporal abilities, once precise tools, became erratic, uncontrollable burdens. They were a living embodiment of chronal dissonance, their very presence subtly altering the flow of time and electromagnetic forces around them. The metallic sheen on their skin, once a sign of strength, now glowed faintly, often flickering with unstable green and prismatic light, reflecting the chaotic energies within. Their crystalline quills, brittle and sharp, would frequently discharge uncontrolled bursts of static electricity, scorching their surroundings or frying sensitive equipment. Their emerald eyes, once clear and intelligent, often swam with fragmented data, glimpses of impossible futures, and echoes of the cryptech's last, agonizing moments, driving them to a maddening internal cacophony. Their hunger, too, was forever twisted, no longer merely seeking advantageous gene sources or specific technological components. They now craved resonance. They were drawn to powerful energy signatures, to rare temporal anomalies, to species with intricate bioelectrical systems, not for integration into a grand scheme, but for a desperate, insatiable need to quell the internal chaos that constantly tormented them. Their consumption was often not for sustenance, but a crude, desperate attempt to re-establish a balance they had forever lost, a painful echo of the cryptech's insatiable thirst for power. They became known by many names across the galaxy. The Time Eaters among superstitious void-farers, the Static Quills by Imperial Guard regiments whose comms would constantly fail in their presence, or the Ghost Hunters by nomadic Xenos who witnessed their spectral appearance and disappearance from reality. Whatever the name, the meaning was the same. They were to be avoided, for their touch brought not just death, but unsettling distortion. Within the Kroot Confederacy, their fate was one of utter damnation. The few scattered Phylactine stalkers who, by some miracle, attempted to rejoin their species were met with unbridled horror and outright hostility. Their brethren saw them as abominations, a mockery of the Kroot way, their very being an insult to the ancestors. They were pariahs, swiftly hunted down and exterminated by their own kind, lest their sickness spread. The story of Chorus became a grim fable, a chilling reminder of the perils of consuming the ancient and the utterly alien, of reaching too far for power and losing one's soul in the process. Among the slumbering Necron dynasties, the incident of the cryptech's destruction and Chorus's self-immolation remained an unquantifiable anomaly, a corrupted data packet. The Maynarch dynasty, when it eventually stirs from the great sleep, will find its ambitious chronomancer missing, its temporal protocols disrupted, its plans irrevocably altered by the unlikely intervention of a barbaric organic species. They will find the fractured chronal nexus on Xylos Prime, a testament to a power they never fully comprehended, and the lingering, chaotic energy signatures of the phylactine stalkers will forever serve as an infuriating, unresolvable mystery in their cold, logical minds. The legacy of the stalking claws, now the cursed phylactine stalkers, is not one of glory or triumph, but of endless, grim struggle. They wander the void, broken, haunted by the ghost of a cryptek's ambition and the dying echoes of a shaper's defiant will. They are a living monument to the tragedy inherent in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. A small kindred, driven to desperation, seeking survival through adaptation, only to become irrevocably twisted into something monstrous, forever lost to their true identity. They are a permanent, agonizing reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, even hope can be a crueler torment than despair. And every victory comes at the ultimate, soul-shattering cost.